All right. It's my very great pleasure to introduce JJ Hensley. JJ is a former police officer and former special agent with the U.S. Secret Service. During his time in the U.S. Secret Service, he conducted criminal investigations, coordinated threat cases, and worked countless protective assignments. He is the author of the novels Resolve, Bolt Action Remedy, which is still my favorite, Record Scratch, Forgiveness Dies, and The Better of the Bad. During his presentation, he will explain the realities of working as a Secret Service agent and how works of fiction so often get nearly every aspect wrong. Please, everyone, welcome JJ Hensley.
So I'm going to share a presentation. Martha gave a little bit about my background there. So after graduating Penn State, I became a police officer in Virginia, Chesterfield County, Virginia, which is outside Richmond. I was there for about 3 years, and then I joined the Secret Service. I was in the Richmond field office, worked a lot of investigations. I'm going to talk about one of the major aspects of investigations that I did with the Secret Service. And then I ended up in the Washington, D.C. field office and worked a lot of protection and some investigations, and then one aspect of what's called protective intelligence, which I'll talk about quite a bit. And then I ended up at headquarters in Washington, D.C. at Intelligence Division, working protective intelligence on that side of things, which is a little bit different than being in the field, doing all the interviews from the field office side. And then after many years in the Secret Service, I ended up in the Pittsburgh area where I actually met Martha. I was training background investigators for another agency that fell under the Office of Personnel Management at the time, still under the federal government. And I was training federal investigators there. And through a long chain of events, I ended up on the training side of things and ended up, now I'm down here outside of Savannah, Georgia. There's a federal law enforcement training center in Brunswick, Georgia. And I train, or help train sometimes, but I deal with training accreditation, federal training accreditation for law enforcement agencies there. So I'm still involved in federal training, but I'm strictly on the training side now, which my wife loves because I'm not flying around and nobody seems to want, well, other than sometimes my wife, nobody seems to want to kill me too much. So it's a little different lifestyle than what I had before, where I was always traveling and working shift work and everything, which is much better. As far as my writing part, I actually didn't even write a book until I was in Pittsburgh, after I'd left the Secret Service and wasn't working on 12-hour shifts and midnights and traveling all the time. I was working 8-hour days, and fortunately my first book, Resolve, met with some success, and then I kept writing after that, and I think I got seven novels out now. So I'm going to put up a PowerPoint if I don't mess up the share screen, which is always a possibility. So you'll want to there's a couple of videos embedded in this, so hopefully they work okay. You'll want your audio up for those when I do play that, and then I will explain what I'm showing. So hopefully this is going to work okay. So hopefully you're seeing the presentation now. And I'm going to talk about some different aspects about the Secret Service. And I'll try to leave some time for Q&A at the end. And that's usually where we get into the myths part, because usually that's where there's all these myths about the Secret Service, and people think a lot of different things about the Secret Service. There's a lot of misconceptions about whether or not the earpieces, and whether or not people would really take a bullet, all those things. So we can think about your questions, and feel free to ask those at the end. I'm other than anything classified and whatnot, I'm happy to answer anything. The Secret Service has been around a long time. 1865 it was created, and the original mission had nothing to do with protection. Most of the time people think about the Secret Service, they think about protecting the president. That's the first thing that comes to mind because that's always what's portrayed in books and in TV and in Hollywood. The Secret Service originally had absolutely nothing to do with protecting anybody. It all had to do with counterfeit money. There was a huge counterfeiting problem that we'll talk about. And that's why the Secret Service was created. That's why it's called the Secret Service, as a matter of fact. Presidential protection didn't come around until 1901, really. They were doing it a little bit on the kind of like a part-time gig up until then, from time to time. But it wasn't until President McKinley was assassinated in 1901 that somebody got the bright idea, said, hey, we've lost a couple presidents now. Maybe three actually. Maybe we should actually, protect these guys a little bit better. And that's when the Secret Service took over. And there was a real fear of having a federal police force. So that's why there was no FBI back then. There was no federal police force. So that's why there was a real fear of having a powerful federal police force. So, and that went back, if you think about it, this is not that long after the Revolution, War of 1812, then the Civil War, and there's still this fear of just a really powerful federal entity that has policing powers. And the Secret Service evolved to, deal with not just counterfeiting and protection, but also all sorts of other crimes against the U.S. economy. So, I ended up dealing with check fraud, and I worked cell phone fraud cases. There was real estate fraud. So there's all sorts of credit card fraud, not my favorite. So there's all sorts of different economic crimes that the Secret Service deals with as well. And the protection mission expanded over the years as well. It got involved with, and you'll see all sorts of acronyms. The government loves acronyms. If I throw out an acronym, you don't know what it is, I'll be happy to answer. The President of the United States, POTUS. The Vice President of the United States, VPOTUS. The Secret Service got involved with protecting major candidates before an election. In the months prior to the general election, major candidates started getting protection. And these days, there are more and more major candidates, so they all get protection. Visiting heads of state from other countries get protected. So people sometimes ask, they'll say, so did you protect the president? Yeah, I protect the president all the time. Just because there's a presidential detail that travels, but if you're in the Secret Service, you end up protecting the president. You also end up protecting the vice president. You protect presidential candidates. You protect the president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the prime minister of Israel, the president of Egypt, the president of Costa Rica. I've got a pin from him, a gift. So you protect a lot of different people. Some extended family members. When we were at war heavily in the Middle East, I remember protecting George W. Bush's nephew. All sorts of different family members. And then there may be some other ones that get mandated protection depending on what the threat is. Then there are what are called NSSEs, National Special Security Events. For instance, the Super Bowl has been designated as one from time to time. The Olympics, I spent 2 months at the Olympics in Salt Lake City, sweeping for bombs. So there are lots of, the protection mission is actually a huge monster of a mission. So I'm going to break this down into the different missions that the Secret Service has. And then this will probably spawn some different questions as far as, my hands look huge when I do this. I apologize. I talk with my hands and I go toward the camera. So I apologize when I'm doing this. This is probably really distracting. So I'm going to break it down into a few different aspects of the Secret Service mission. The first one being counterfeiting. So this was my favorite investigative mission. I love counterfeit money cases. I loved working counterfeit cases all the time. So during the Civil War, 1/2 to 2/3 of the money in the United States was actually counterfeit. And if you think about it, it makes sense. There was no national currency. The banks were able to print their own money, both in the South, in the Confederacy, and then later in in the South and in the North, banks could print their own money. So nobody knew what money was supposed to look like. If you were in Georgia, you had no idea what New York money looked like. If you were in Pennsylvania, you had no idea what New Jersey money looked like. So counterfeiting was running rampant. The methods of making money were not very modern compared to what we have now. So counterfeit money was a huge deal, and it caused all sorts of problems. People didn't have faith in the currency. It caused inflation. So eventually this became just a huge economic crisis. And in 1865, Abraham Lincoln, actually on April 14th, 1865, he signed an executive order, and part of that executive order started the creation of the United States Secret Service. And the abbreviation for the United States Secret Service, by the way, is USSS, not SS. People like to do that, and because of Nazi Germany, we don't really appreciate the SS part of that. So the United States Secret Service was created as a division of the Treasury Department, and Abraham Lincoln signed that executive order, and then he went off to go see a play at Ford's Theater called Our American Cousin. He definitely should have skipped that play, as you can probably imagine. He ended up being assassinated there. So there's a certain irony for the fact that he signed that executive order. A few months later, the official act came into play, and the Secret Service was created. Now, again, the Secret Service didn't actually take over presidential protection until 1901. So much later, the Secret Service was actually under the Treasury Department to combat counterfeit currency. And they were called the Secret Service because they were going to do this covertly. A lot of undercover operations occurred. And there's actually a fascinating history, if you look it up, about these covert operations for combating counterfeit money. And then much later, during my career with Secret Service, this was spawned from the attacks of September 11th, 2001. The Secret Service moved under the Department of Homeland Security in 2003. But they kept that mission of combating counterfeit currency, even though they're very heavy into protection as well. So the printing method for counterfeit money, it was actually called lithography. And I'm not going to go into great detail about that. And then later it went to offset printing. Now, offset printing is lithography is antiquated now. Offset printing are these huge printing presses, and they still use it. But you usually see it in a big business. And there's these huge printing presses with these big rubber rollers. I'm going to show you one in a minute. And the ink is actually transferred from rubber to a surface, and it's intended for mass printing jobs. It's not like your Xerox copier. And this actually became relevant after 1875. So this is post-Civil War, and this became the main method for counterfeiting, because if you're going to counterfeit, you're going to do it right. You're going to print a whole bunch of money. So I'm going to show you a video of an offset printing method, if this video will work. And this is from the movie To Live and Die in L.A., a bit of an older movie now, from the 1980s. And you'll probably hear the music, which is definitely 80s music. And you're going to see actor Willem Dafoe in a kimono, I think. So apologize for that, but he's there. But he's using an offset printer.
give her presentation. You show the movie clip.
So he makes the money on the offset printer using aluminum plates, and then for the to have the image on there, and they transfers the image onto the paper using high quality ink, high quality paper, and then he's throwing it in the dryer there with poker chips and some clothes to wrinkle up the money, because if you got fresh bills, you're going to take a closer look at them. If you actually just get bills from the bank, or not from the bank, but from anywhere, and they're all wrinkled up and everything, they're going to feel more normal. So that's why he's doing that. So that is briefly offset printing. And so then that was the age of offset printing. Offset printers, as I mentioned, they still exist, and you won't see counterfeiters use those much anymore unless it's a country counterfeiting. Some nations still counterfeit our money. North Korea has done it. Iraq has done it. Some South American countries do it. But for the most part, individuals don't use offset printers to counterfeit money, because computers came out. Home computers came out and made it much easier to counterfeit money. They came out with this with scanning and color printing ability, made it much easier. And we in the Secret Service, we called these P notes, because they were just home printers. We called C notes these circular notes. We call them circular notes. Those were the offset printers. So these P notes came out. Now there was less of this. We'd see less volume as far as the individual batches of counterfeit notes. We call them notes. They're Federal Reserve notes. So if you hear me refer to counterfeit money as notes, it's because if you actually look at the money, it says Federal Reserve note. That's what they are. So because money could also be change. Currency is change. Federal Reserve note, that's what the actual paper money is. So the people won't actually like mass produce huge volumes on a computer. It's hard to do. You run out of ink, whatnot. So you get less volume, but it's easier to manufacture. Now the quality is not nearly as good as what you get in an offset printer, so it's easier to detect. And there's other issues with any kind of counterfeit that I'll bring up in a minute. The age of the offenders, the people who are doing this, changed dramatically, because you don't get teenagers with an offset printer, but you sure got a lot of teenagers with a home computer. So all of a sudden you got a bunch of teenagers who are passing counterfeit at Taco Bell, at a drive-through at 2 a.m, because who at Taco Bell at 2 a.m. is really looking at that $10 bill. So now you got counterfeit money everywhere. Tracking is the way how we would catch these people, because people they wouldn't change the serial numbers on the bills. They just copy one $10 bill and the same serial number keeps popping up, and we could track it back. And eventually we would go and be able to track it back to a person. And it wouldn't be that difficult most of the time. So it actually is hard to make good counterfeit money, because actual counterfeit money is not made on paper. If you look at the money that you actually have in your pocket or in your house, it's not paper. The Federal Reserve notes are actually, it's 25% linen, 75% cotton. It's blue jeans. The money you have is actually essentially blue jeans. That's why when you put it in the washing machine, it doesn't just fall apart. It doesn't dissolve. It's also, if you really take a close look at it, and I like to do these, I like to do this type of presentation in person and get everybody to get money out, not just so I can steal it from them. But if you actually look at it really closely, you see little red and blue fibers embedded in the money. That's because that's in the paper. This is a special type of paper that's only made in one place in the United States, and there's one contract on it. The United States government has that contract. I believe the place is in Massachusetts that makes this money. And the only place that can get this I call it paper, but it's blue jeans. The only place that can get this material is the United States government. So there's little red and blue fibers embedded. There's some other classified features that I can't talk about this material. And it feels different than any kind of paper that you would actually get. And another feature is that you see those counterfeit detection pins that if you go past like a $50 bill or $100 bill in a store that somebody's going to market, the reason those work is that there's an iodine mixture in those pins, and it's going to, or the mixture in the pins is going to react to the iodine in the actual paper. So you won't get that reaction if you actually use that on the 25% linen and 75% cotton mix. So that is your brief crash course in counterfeit money. I usually do. I actually have like taught a whole class in just that aspect. So now I'm going to skip over to some talk about protection, because that is the other one of the other main aspects of the Secret Service mission. So there are a few different components of protection that I'm going to talk about. There's protecting sites, because you got to protect the physical location. The routes, what we call the people who are you're protecting, the protectee, how the protectee is getting to and from a location. So the motorcade route or the walking route, the people themselves or the protectee. And then there's the other aspect that I worked very heavily in, and that was protective intelligence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these. So protecting sites, there are so many aspects that I couldn't possibly get involved in talking about all of this. But when you're protecting when the Secret Service goes and protects a site, there's a lot of advanced work that goes in. So when the president goes and is going to go visit somewhere, so say the president is going to go to Tampa, Florida. I remember working a protection visit in Tampa, as a matter of fact. There's an advanced team is going to show up a week ahead of time, at least a week ahead of time, depending on the size of the event. And that's when the advanced work starts. And there's going to be agents who are in charge of each site the president's going to be at. They're going to work with local law enforcement. There's going to be military and law enforcement explosive ordnance teams that are going to coordinate sweeps to look for explosives. There's a whole aspect that I did quite a bit with the Secret Service called technical security, where one of the things you do is you try to mitigate explosives, nuclear, biological, radiological, and any other kind of hazardous material threats. So you got to deal with that aspect of it. You got to check, I mean, every aspect from, the things you don't even think about, like the elevators. You got to check the mechanical room, make sure nobody rigged the cables to blow. Every fire extinguisher that's in the hallway, make sure that they're okay. So every bit of that has to be mapped out and checked and inspected. You got to make sure you have the right number of dogs to sweep everything. There's going to be what are called counter sniper teams who are extremely good, so that they can look out for any kind of snipers that are out there. There's counter surveillance units who are in plain clothes. There are multiple aspects out there. And depending on the city, you're going to get a different level of support. If you're in Washington, D.C., this is an everyday occurrence. They're not going, the whole venue is not going to, the whole city is not going to turn upside down for the president going down the street. This happens all the time. If you're in Madison, Wisconsin, they're going to do whatever you ask. They're going to remove those big blue mailboxes off the street. You want them moved because you're afraid somebody could put a bomb in it, they're going to move them. And they'll do whatever you ask. If it's a huge event like the Olympics, they're going to do whatever you ask because it's a huge, they're going to basically just wall off the city. It just depends on what type of event it is. A couple of the areas of focus on any kind of site are going to be the arrival and departure of the protectee, because that's where, if you have somebody who's a threat, that's where the person is going to focus on, because that's where they know the protectee is going to be, the arrival and the departure. If you think about it, route is going to be varied, but arrival, departure, you can kind of guess where that's going to be. There's only so many entrances and exits of a place. But there's all sorts of countermeasures and different options, even for the people going in and out of an event. That's why you see what are called magnetometers, the metal detectors that are in place, whether or not they're the standing kind or the hand wands. So those go into place. Then we talked a little bit about the routes. There's motorcades and what are called emergency motorcade locations. All that has to be thought out. What if this area? What if this route gets blocked? What's the alternate route? What's the nearest hospital? There's always an emergency motorcade. If you can't get to that motorcade, guess what? There's a second motorcade that's going to be stashed. And even the logistics of the motorcade have to be thought out. Okay, what is the order of the vehicles? There's a special order of the vehicles and where the agents are placed. So there's a lot of moving pieces that I couldn't possibly go into in this presentation. We'd be here for 2 days. One of the myths that I will address right now is something you see on TV, and I've seen it in books as well. It drives me crazy when I see it in Hollywood productions or novels. Is if and it's not just Secret Service, but it could be police protecting somebody, FBI protecting somebody, because people love to use the FBI, is when they're protecting somebody and then there's a threat and they go running with the protectee to wherever they're going. They just run with them and try to get them away to some far off location. It's not like that. What happens is, if they're a real protective detail, they're going to take them to a hard room. A hard room is a room where there's no windows and like one door. And then the cops, the agents, they got guns. They're going to harden up on the protectee. What that means is, hey, there's no windows, there's one door, we got our guns. We're making a stand right here and keeping this person safe. Then they'll do this at a hotel. We would designate this at a hotel. We'd designate this at a restaurant. Wherever we were with a protectee, we designated a hard room. It may be a bathroom. It could be a large closet. Wherever it was, you had a designated hard room where people couldn't be shooting in windows or whatnot. And you hold your ground until the cavalry arrives and more agents show up. So that's something that is definitely a myth in Hollywood. And they go running and screaming to whereabouts unknown, rather than just harden up on a protectee and just wait. And you got highly trained agents with weaponry. They can stand behind cover, behind partially hidden behind a wall and shoot all day. So that's something that I did want to point out now. I talked about technical security a little bit, explosive, chemical, biological, and radiological threats. They support protective and investigative missions. So they also handle any kind of audio surveillance, things of that nature. They make sure there's recordings of all the radio conversations as well. There's it's part of the advanced work. It continues all the way through the visit though. So there's the initial like bomb sweeps going through the hotel, making sure that there's no explosives, but then it goes on throughout the entire visit of the protectee. So maybe there's a suspicious package in the lobby. Technical security and the what's called an explosive ordnance disposal team goes and checks that out as well. And they conduct what are called site surveys. They may, those can vary greatly. It could be a huge convention center where there's modern ventilation and fire suppression and all of these things. versus, and I've done those before where there's all these modern conveniences, and I've done it at the Virginia Military Institute, where there's no, you have a room where a huge hall where there's no air conditioning and no fire alarm, and you don't need to worry about protecting anybody from throwing a chemical weapon in front of the HVAC unit, because there is none. So there's no backup power. So you got to worry about everybody having a flashlight. So it can vary greatly depending on the venue. Routes, motorcade versus walking. Is your protectee going to be walking for a long distance? That could be a huge threat. The motorcade, where could the attack come from? You do have alternate routes. You got to know where all the hospitals are, all the police departments are, fire departments are. You have to have something called a sweep vehicle to go up ahead and look for any kind of suspicious packages along the route, any kind of tripwires, what's called an RPG, rocket propelled grenade, set on the side of the road, all of these things that it could be there. Motorcades, sometimes there'll be something called where a shell game is played, where the protectee is placed in one car, but then maybe the cars move around a little bit somewhere during the route. So somebody may not know exactly which car the protectee is in. And there can be, even in high threat situations, there can be multiple motorcades. We did this after September 11th. We would run multiple motorcades out of the White House, and you wouldn't know which motorcade the president was in. And then there's protecting people, the protectees. There's a protective detail that travels with the protectee, the president, vice president, whoever it may be. But then there's everybody else. There's the advanced team. There's everybody on the periphery, because there's field offices for the Secret Service all over the country, and then several internationally as well. So even when I was in the Richmond field office, I would travel and work protection quite a bit. In fact, I came out of the academy. Right when I came out of the academy, I think I was in the field office about a week. And then boom, I was in Syracuse, New York, working. I think I was protecting Hillary Clinton for a visit up there. And then, I was back in the field office for another week. And then it was right during the election. Bill Clinton was leaving office and George W. Bush was getting ready to come in. And so boom, I was at the Democratic National Convention. I was there for weeks. And, then I'm in Waterloo, Iowa, and then I'm in Portland, Maine. And you bounce around and you work all these different assignments. So now protection is a weird gig, especially if you've been in law enforcement in any other capacity. So for me, I had been a police officer before, and you're trained, if there's a threat, to get behind cover and to then neutralize the threat if you need to. When I became Secret Service, even when I was working in investigations, you were still trained to take cover. But when you work protection, you're trained that you are the cover and you shield whoever you're protecting. And that's a real hard thing to get used to, especially, when things are happening very fast. There's a lot of noise, there could be explosions, and they try to train you on this as best they can. There's a lot of training involved. You go to training first at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center here where I work now, actually, in Glencoe, Georgia. You do a training academy there, and then you go to Maryland, Beltsville, Maryland, and you do a special Secret Service academy there that focuses a lot on protection. And they try to drill it into you, and you have to do a lot of protection drills to get used to that aspect of throwing yourself in front of that, putting your body in front of the threat, pulling your car in front of between the threatening car and the limo. There's a lot of different aspects to them. You learn a lot of the positioning around a protectee. It's not just simply standing around, and looking stoic as I still do. And then you learn to work rope lines. The rope lines when the protectee is shaking hands and whatnot. For instance, here's a picture of President Obama This is, kind of a classic rope line. You see people are even like grabbing at his neck, and you see a Secret Service agent, peeling a hand off his neck. You can even see a lady here. I'm 99% sure that she's an agent inside the crowd. And I've done this before where I'm an agent working the other side of the crowd on a rope line when George W. Bush was president. So you see agent. And I did this when John Kerry was a candidate in Madison, Wisconsin, and you're just working the rope line and peeling hands off. And, hopefully this is probably a screened crowd that's been through magnetometers at this point. And then the positioning. This is a Bernie Sanders rally. And you can see the agents giving 360-degree coverage at this huge rally all the way around here. And if they had to evacuate, they would evacuate straight off these stairs and push through this. There's other agents here that would open up a path there. And then there's protective intelligence. And I mentioned, I worked protective intelligence for many years. So since 1835, there has been more than a dozen attacks on presidents. It's certainly not unprecedented. There's been countless attacks on members of Congress, state and local officials, judges, other political figures. Protective intelligence and threat assessment is gathering and assessing information on those who have an inclination or ability to attack a public official. It's all about gathering. It's all about prevention. It's not about even arresting somebody. It's about preventing the attack in the first place. There's a former Secret Service director, and he probably put it best. He would say, if the guns came out, we've already lost. It's about preventing it from getting to that stage. And a lot of different entities have different protective intelligence apparatus. There's the Secret Service, the Capitol Police, the Marshal Service, Supreme Court Police, FBI, Diplomatic Security Service, military, and a lot of state and local. A lot of different other ones as well. And now we saw a failure of this as far as what happened going up the chain communication-wise with the Capitol Police with January 6th, 2021. And obviously there was intelligence available, but it wasn't used properly and it wasn't acted upon. So sometimes the intelligence is only as good as how it's utilized. But as far as the Secret Service goes, what we would do is we would actually get information on an individual, because a lot of times they would just show up at the White House at the gate, and they would say, I'm here to talk to the president, and here's why, I intend to harm him or her, or I have this letter I want to give him, and sometimes they would say some really odd, bizarre things. Sometimes they'd come to our attention another way. They would say something to a family member or a friend, and that's how they would come to our attention. And then I would go interview them. And there were some interesting individuals. A lot of them were mentally disturbed. Some of them were not. The one thing that is a myth is that there is some sort of mystery profile of an assassin. The Secret Service has done something called the Exceptional Case Study program, and they've updated it at least once since they did the initial one. And what it uncovered was that there is no profile for an assassin. They've ranged in ages greatly, from teenager to the elderly. Their education has varied greatly. There's been, a lot of them have been kind of socially isolated, but that could be due to some of them having some mental instability. Now, a lot of them did have histories of harassment and harassing behavior. That's not real surprising. Very few of them had been incarcerated. So sometimes they hadn't taken it far enough to be incarcerated, which is a little frightening, actually, because you don't have that to act upon. Few had formal weapons training, so that was kind of a positive. And there was, but many had emotional issues as well. The bottom one is actually the most interesting. Most had indicated interest in attacking a public figure to someone else. They like to talk about it. They like to tell someone about it. That's why, kind of where you get that thing, if you see something, say something. a lot of the people actually indicated some intention to hurt somebody. Some of the things were key observations out of that study. Assassinations and attack of public officials are the products of understandable and discernible processes of thinking. So if you actually looked at the totality of the circumstances and their behavior, there were some indicators there, but I have this on another slide, it's not an exact science by any stretch of the imagination. Humans are very complex. We all know that from our writing, from our research, from our lives. It's anything but an exact science. Most of the people who attacked did perceive it to be some sort of means to an end. They thought it was going to resolve some sort of issue. It may be some crazy issue. And I mean, it's going to stop the voices. It's going to, impress Jodie Foster. Anything. Some of them were very organized. And that's one of the key components when you're doing a protective intelligence assessment. Does the person have an organized method of thinking? Do they have structure in their life? Can they actually formulate a plan? And one of the things that we actually looked at a lot was, could they function on a daily basis? Could they, if did they have some grandiose plan that was just so outlandish that there's no way it could work? But could they actually put it together if they had the right circumstances? So the key functions of protective intelligence are identifying the individual, assessing them, and then managing that person and seeing, okay, what are their intentions? Are they okay if they're properly medicated? Because I've done that. I've dealt with a guy who was absolutely out of his mind, crazy, suffered from severe schizophrenia, was hearing voices and seemed to have intentions of hurting the president. And then he got on medication, and I did a follow-up visit with him, and nicest kid in the world. And I call him a kid. He was probably 19. He was apologetic. He was respectful. He just needed the right balance and right medication. 6 months later, he was off his meds, back at the White House. So that's why we would always say in the reports, if a person wasn't a threat, we would say, individual does not appear to be a threat at this time, because a few weeks later, that individual, the circumstances could have completely changed for that person. So identification, we get their self-identifiers, their date of birth and whatnot. What is it that makes them a threat? What are they saying? I mentioned how some were identified. Some it would be by behavior. Did they have pictures of the president or vice president or whoever in their backyard and they're shooting targets? A neighbor called it in. That's happened. Did they just mouth off to a cab driver? That's happened. It could be something related to a different investigation, and it gets stumbled upon. And you're like, whoa, what's this? So we'll interview, the Secret Service will interview that individual, but interviewing especially the people who are mentally disturbed, all the body language stuff kind of goes out the window. There's these indicators of deception that you look at when you're interviewing somebody for a criminal investigation. You look for somebody for maybe they're doing a grooming technique on their picking lint off their shirt, they're playing with their hair, their eyes are shifting, because these are indicators of deception. With somebody who is off their medication, all those indicators may be completely off. Or they may not be showing indicators of deception because they think that God really told them to come out to the White House and talk to the president, and they are telling the truth because in their mind they're telling the truth. So they're telling you their truth. So it's really difficult. And I spent, God, I don't know how many hours upon hours talking to mentally disturbed people. As Martha can tell you, I've probably spent too many hours talking to mentally disturbed people, and it probably rubbed off on me. So I spent a lot of time talking to mentally ill people, and it kind of became a specialty of mine, and it became, but it's really difficult to discern their truth from what is the actual truth, because their body language is just right out the window with a lot of them. So you have to talk to the other people. You have to talk to witnesses, coworkers, neighbors, family members, and get the whole picture. You're going to search, as much as you can. You're going to search them, their living quarters, their belongings. If they have a car, their car, and sometimes that's some really bizarre stuff. Some bizarre writings, some really weird stuff you're going to find in their house. And then you might find some stuff that's of predictive value, but sometimes it can be a little misleading as well. And then you assess them. You look at all these factors on here. And I know this is being recorded, so you can go back and look at this, but there's a whole list of different things that you're going to look at to try to get a feel for the entire person, and kind of gauge whether or not they are a threat at this time. And a lot of them, some of them, they may have an interest in assassinations. Do they have 27 copies of The Catcher in the Rye? Okay, now we need to talk about this. Mark David Chapman had that. He had this obsession with it. He's someone who shot John Lennon. Does it? Do they have an interest in particular assassins or assassinations? It's something that you would need to look at. Do they keep visiting a particular site that's linked to a protectee for some reason? Do they keep trying to approach a protectee? And then you have to remember that their target may change. Arthur Bremer, he shot George Wallace. He initially wanted to target Richard Nixon. They can just kind of veer off sometimes. They get something in their head and they can veer off. They're going to be classified. So the Secret Service classifies them class 1, class 2, class 3, class 3 being the most dangerous, class 2 being, we're going to definitely keep an eye on, class 1 being kind of your typical unusual interest case. And whoever's the protection detail and the staff for that protectee, they're going to be briefed on the threat. I'm going to skip that video because I know it's already after 12. So actually, you know what? I'm going to show this. This is who you would be interviewing. I'm going to show a little bit of this. This is a guy who suffers from schizophrenia. I'm thinking around the 3-minute mark.
At times his voices tell him to do things. In just the short time he's been in this program, the voices at times have told him that he's got to leave because we're going to hurt him. So obviously they say things that greatly distress him, that scare him.
Nice to see you.
Dr. Bigelow's the clinical director.
Sorry, I'm going to rewind it, let you see the beginning of Gerald here.
In jail or kill me, electrocute me because of some of the sins I've been in. Is this a new feeling for you? The main thing is don't get excited, but the thing is it's not a new feeling, no. I'm scared of people. It must be very frightening for you, though. Feels like you're about to get killed. I'm so scared I can tell you that picture's got a headache. Can you tell me more about that? The picture has a headache? You want to know? Yes, I do. Okay, when a sperm and an egg go together to make a baby, only one sperm goes up in the egg. And when they touch, there's 2 contact points that touch before the other 2. And then it's carried up into the egg. And when they fuse, it's like nuclear fusion, except it's human fusion. There's a mass loss of the proton. One heat abstraction goes up in the electron, spins around, comes back down into the proton to form the mind, and the mind could be reduced to 1 atom.
Jerry, in one patient at one time, shows almost every one of the major features of schizophrenia. His thinking is disorganized. The thoughts are loosely connected. He has formed delusional ideas. Some of those delusions are grandiose. Some of them are paranoid. He has disturbances in his mood. His mood is, in some cases, almost absent, and in other cases is totally inappropriate. And his behavior is disordered. It's unusual. He has mannerisms that are inexplicable. He has purposeless, aimless behavior around the ward. He's a textbook case. He combines all those things in one person.
At this point, what would you like us to do for you? I'd like you to get me off of cigarettes. Get me dried out, cleaned up, so I can go home and get a job in a bakery and go to medical school.
Jerry's voice.
Okay, so you heard him just in that brief moment. You heard him talk about how the picture on the wall has a headache, and then he goes into this bizarre explanation about how a sperm and an egg come together, and then he goes into just this weird theory, and then he has this grandiose plan of getting off cigarettes, going to work in a bakery, and then going to medical school. So this is when you're interviewing somebody like this is what you're trying to muddle through. And you have to, I mean, you're doing this and you're taking this seriously because you want to get all the information. Here's somebody who's obviously in need of help. And you want this person to get help. You're certainly not going to laugh at this person or anything like that. This is a person who's in need. And you want this person to get help. You just want to make sure that this person is not a threat. Because this is a person who could be a threat just on a given day. Now, they're not going to, in his current condition, he is not going to come up with any kind of actionable plan. He's not organized enough to do that. But he is obviously very confused, and he could act on any voice in his head because he's that far gone. As an example, I try not to tell actual stories, too many stories from when I was working, but this was kind of a textbook example of a guy who was suffering from mental illness and drug addiction. So I remember getting a call. It was actually from a cab driver in DC who called it into the office when I was in Washington, and he dropped a guy off at a hotel in a bad part of town who said that he was in town to talk to the president. And he said the guy was talking crazy. So I took another agent with me to this hotel. It was like a Super 8 in Southeast DC or something like that. And we go there, and the agent, he was new at this. He had never done protective intelligence. And at this point, I'd been doing it probably too long. And we go and knock on the door, and the guy opens the door. And a lot of times they want to talk to you. They want to talk. So this guy, he opens the door wide, and he's like happy. As soon as we show our badges and say we're Secret Service, he's like, come on in. So I open the door, and immediately I look around. I just glance around the room, and I notice the electrical outlets are unscrewed and on the floor. There's some sort of writing on the pillow. The smoke detectors are unscrewed and dangling from wires. I glance into the bathroom, and I see footprints are on the edge of the tub, and a smoke detector there is dangling from from wires as well. And there's a shower curtain rod seems to be dislodged. And then I glance under a dresser, and there's a Brillo pad that is darkened. It's scorched under one of the dressers. So immediately I kind of turn and give a knowing look to the guy who was with me, and the guy who looks at me, and he says something to the guy like, "Why did you tear up this room?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, he doesn't see what's going on." And the guy's like, "What do you mean? Like why wouldn't you know?" And I said, "No, it's okay. It's okay. I get it." And I said, "Did you did you find the devices? He's like, no, not yet. I said, okay, it's okay. I said, just tell me why you're in town. And I said, okay, do you have any more crack cocaine? And he's like, no, I used it all. And we talked to the guy, and the guy's cooperative, and he doesn't appear to be threatening. He doesn't have any weapons. He lets us search the room. And we get all of his information and everything. And there was no reason to hold him. But I got all of his information so we could follow up with him and everything. And we leave there, and the agent who was with me goes, okay, what was all that? And I said, okay, so he's obviously he's got some issues. He's probably schizophrenic. He's mentally ill. He's not a threat to himself or others, so we can't take him in. We can't even get him a 72-hour committal at this point. I said, he's looking for the listening devices in his room. People, because he's paranoid. He's like, that's why he tore off all the outlets and everything. I said, yeah. I said, he's high. He goes, well, why'd you ask about crack? I said, the burned up Brillo pad. They use it as a screen when they smoke crack. So he used it as a screen. He's been smoking crack, which heightened his paranoia. So he ripped out all the outlets, and then he started to work on the smoke detectors, which is why I stood on the top of the bathtub as well, ripped that out as well. He goes, well, what about the writing on the pillow? I said, because that's how he communicates with the people on the TV. I said, obviously they can't hear him, so that he's writing on the pillow. He's like, oh, well, yeah, obviously. Like, of course. I'm like, yeah, you'll get used to it. He's like, I am not getting used to this. So after a while, you probably shouldn't do this too long, or you start to think like them. And I actually ran into a guy down here at FLGC, an older, he's probably 80 years old, retired Secret Service agent. And we were talking one day in the locker room, and he said something like, the one thing I never got used to was working protective intelligence. I said, he goes, talking to all those people. I said, yeah, I know what you mean. I said after a while, you kind of start to understand what they're saying, right? And the guy looked at me and cocked his head and goes, no, I was going to say that you start to realize how crazy they are. I was like, oh yeah, that's what I meant. And I just walked away. So maybe it's just me, but there are some interesting cases that you do eventually start to kind of see some patterns with them. So you've probably heard the expression that if you make a threat against the president, even if it's a joke, that it is a crime. That's true. And it is also extremely time consuming. It takes up so much time because that person, there's going to be so much that goes into it. There's going to be a notification to the Secret Service. That person has to be interviewed. There's going to be electronic checks on that person. There's going to be, wherever that person is, there's going to be an agent assigned to the case. Relatives are going to be interviewed, probably co-workers, friends. The local police department is going to be checked. They're going to have to check with the local mental health services. You're eating up so much time and resources because of this so-called joke. So please don't do that. I'm going to skip that part. So we talked about protective intelligence being a proactive measure rather than reactive. So it is the proactive part of the exercise as well. I mentioned it is not an exact science. It is absolutely not an exact science. It varied day to day with a lot of those people because their motivations could change. It is not like the movie In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood and John Malkovich, even though that is probably the most realistic Secret Service movie. If you take out the initial scene where he's working undercover with his badge on in his pocket, that doesn't make any sense. And he holds a gun to his partner's head and pulls the trigger because he knows the weight of the gun because there's no bullets in it. It makes no sense. So evaluations are conditional, subject to change. I mentioned that. No such thing as a joke. If you ever want to check out the Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center website, I believe that link is still current there. They have some good information on there, a lot of different resources that are pretty interesting as well. So some misconceptions, myths and wow, I can't say that. Myths and misconceptions that I wanted to talk about. So people talk about Secret Service and personal opinions. The personal opinions part, whether or not the personal opinions will affect an agent performing in the field. The answer is, in my experience and from what I know of any agents I've worked with and that I still know, is the answer is no. And the answer is pretty simple, because you're trained a certain way and you're going to react the way you were trained. You have muscle memory. And so I was I came on when President Clinton was in office, and then George W. Bush. I was there through most of his presidency. And I also protected, the vice presidents during those times. I protected some former presidents. I protected President Carter, President Ford. I protected a lot of foreign presidents at the time. And I reacted the same way, regardless of who I was protecting. You are trained, it's ingrained in you to react and protect the same way. You can't let your political feelings, and I have strong ones. If you ever want to follow me on Twitter, I have some very strong political feelings, and it may not be what you think. But you cannot react to your political feelings or anything like that. It's ingrained in you how you're going to react. It is so ingrained in you that my wife still gets mad at me, because when I will still grab and protect her if I hear, and I've been out of the Secret Service for many, many years now. We were at a Pittsburgh Pirates baseball game many years ago, and a storm came up, and we were walking in the concourse because they evacuated the stands, and we're walking side by side in the concourse, and the wind blew down a small concession stand, one of those dipping dot stands or something, and it blew down behind us in the corridor and made a loud sound that sounded very much like a gunshot. I grabbed my wife and covered and protected her the same way you do a protectee, the exact same method. And I covered and pulled her down and covered her and started moving her toward the motorcade that we do not have, by the way. It was a Volkswagen Jetta that was probably a mile away, and started hustling her away. And she's flailing, going, "What are you doing?" And of course, everybody thinks I'm abducting my wife. And I've done this to her on multiple occasions now, at concerts where a fight broke out, or there's been some sort of loud bang, and I still do this. And my wife keeps getting very angry at me for some reason. I don't know why. She obviously doesn't see how valiant and chivalrous I'm being. But I keep grabbing my wife and abducting her. And so it's ingrained, no matter what, that to react a certain way. So it wouldn't matter who I was protecting, and it doesn't matter who the Secret Service is protecting. They're going to react the way that they're trained. It's so weird that even over a decade after I've been out of the Secret Service, I still have those muscle memory reactions, much to my wife's dismay. The earpieces, yes, they do work. They actually do go to a radio, and usually you're talking to a command post. And the command post is it could be set up in a hotel room somewhere. It's going to be set up where, a good location where people can actually hear on the radio, and there's an agent there who's coordinating communications. One of the things that drives me crazy in Hollywood productions is when the agents are wearing an earpiece, and then they're like 10 feet away from each other, and then they talk to each other on the radio through the earpiece. But no, we would just turn and talk to each other. It'd be, hey Ted, can you go over there? Yeah, sure. You don't need to use the earpiece for that. And by the way, and this goes for all books involving law enforcement, nobody talks to each other and call in the same office and talks to each other and calls each other Agent Smith, Agent Jones, Agent this, or Detective this, and Detective that. It's an office. They call each other by their first names just like anybody else. It's not like they do on TV. The sunglasses. Okay, the sunglasses, first of all, Secret Service agents don't wear them inside. That's a TV thing. I don't know where they get that. But the sunglasses are actually just helpful because you never know which way you're going to be turning, and then the sun is in your eyes. I actually saw this crazy YouTube video the other day that said that Secret Service agents wear the sunglasses so that any potential bad guys won't see that they're being looked at. No, it's if you're standing outside for 8 to 12 hours a day, it just really hurts your eyes. So that's really the only reason why the sunglasses are there. No, Secret Service agents are not robots. We do have emotions. We do get hungry and do need water sometimes. So that's pretty normal. The backgrounds of agents. So everybody, I get this question a lot. Are all agents former police officers or former military? No. I worked with agents who had former backgrounds in computer science, accounting. Worked with one who was a lawyer, a couple who were lawyers. And there was quite a variety. I would say a majority had a background in law enforcement or some sort of investigations. And quite a few had military backgrounds, but there was quite a few who did not. There was a lot who came from just a variety of different backgrounds. So it kind of varied from all over the place. Excuse me. And then, of course, this is always a movie thing. Do the Secret Service and do they know some sort of secret ninja death kung fu? No, you go through quite a bit of defensive tactics training, different fighting styles, stuff like that. But it's not they don't show you how to like kill somebody with your thumb or something like that. It's not like that, like they show you on TV. It's not like that. You learn how to subdue people and not kill them. Hopefully, you're going to get them in handcuffs. But if you're working protection, you're focused on protecting the person and getting them out of there, and then dealing with the threat as much as possible. Now, you do use firearms a lot. You do learn to shoot very good. I thought I could shoot when I was a police officer, and I realized that when I went to the Secret Service, they really taught me to shoot. And I hate guns, by the way. That's another thing. But it was just kind of a tool for the job. No, that's not. We don't learn anything like crazy kung fu or anything like that. And that was another thing on the YouTube video I saw. Is like they said that Secret Service agents learned some sort of crazy Russian martial art or something like that. I was like, oh God, nope. So let me see how much time I have. All right, so I'm gonna give you a quick closing story. Here, I think it's my closing story. And just tell this one because it kind of shows you how odd the profession is and how it can be kind of scary and comical. And it also plays into the use of force issues that we've seen with police today. I'm a big advocate of police reform. I'll put that out there right now. I think there's been way too many police shootings, and I think there needs to be that needs to be addressed. And I'm a big advocate of police reform. If you followed me on social media, you've seen that. So I will say that this story is completely true, and it was very bizarre. So this happened in beginning of 2002. So this is not just a few months after September 11th, 2011. So you got to remember the circumstances. It was everybody was really on edge, Everybody's waiting for the next big attack. Suicide bombers is the hot topic. Everybody's waiting for that to happen. I'm working in DC, and I've been assigned working protective intelligence with the motorcade on a high-level threat target who's visiting from the Middle East. And he has decided to go visit his ambassador, who's based on Embassy Row in Washington, D.C. And the motorcade is pulled up to the ambassador's residence, and the protectee has decided to go inside and visit the ambassador. So I'm outside by the motorcade, and I have recently gone through some training. The Secret Service recommended some training, and I went through with some other agents with this private contractor And the contractor, it was a suicide bomber. They called it suicide bomber prevention, but it was really suicide bomber. I don't know what you want to call it, but it was a little disturbing. And they sent us to this training in Northern Virginia, and they said, these are the indicators of a suicide bomber. And if you see these, this is how you should react. And they said, okay, indicators of suicide bombers are disheveled clothing, glassy eyes. Glassy eyes because suicide bombers would sometimes sedate themselves. This something goes back to the Leo tigers back in the Philippines, and they would sedate themselves with some sort of drugs to keep themselves calm, so they would detonate. Backpacks, wires, hesitancy. These are all things that would be indicative of a potential suicide bomber. And we were told to certainly be on the lookout for that with the person I was protecting. And so I'm standing out by the motorcade, and it's kind of a busy late morning, I believe, in Embassy Row. And I'm standing out there, and all of a sudden I see, and there's other police officers and agents around, but I'm kind of by myself, and I see this guy walking down the road, and he's kind of stumbling a little bit. I'm like, okay, now you got my attention. And he's got this flannel shirt on, but he's only got it over one arm, and the rest of it's just dangling behind him. And now he's got and I noticed he's got a backpack on as well. And now he's definitely got my attention because the shirt's kind of untucked, his hair's messed up, he's unshaven, so he's looking disheveled. Backpack, disheveled. Okay, now I got to go at least talk to him because he's walking toward the motorcade, walking toward the house. So I step out, my suit, earpiece, sunglasses, of course, and I step out and I start approaching him. His badge is showing. I said, "Hey, sir, how you doing? Yeah, can I help you with something?" And he stops and freezes, and he kind of like turns a little bit. And then when he turns, I see the backpack is open a little bit, and there's wires hanging out. Now I'm very concerned. And now he turns back and looks at me, and his eyes are red and bloodshot. Now I'm in full alert mode. And I take another step toward him. I said, "Police, can I help you with something?" And now I'm thinking he's going to back up or something. And by the way, if a suicide bomber is confronted by police and they're stopped before they get to their target, their first reaction is to detonate because they want to take out as many people as they can. So now his reaction is not what I expected. He takes off running toward the house where the protectee is. Well, that's bad. So I run and I cut him off, and I get in front of him and I'm pulling my gun. I'm like, stop. And he does stop, and I'm like, well, now he's going to detonate. I'm toast. And he looks at me, and I'm like, and I was told at this point to shoot him in the head. That's what I was trained, because you don't want to shoot him in the vest because that might go off. I didn't shoot, and I waited, and I just figured I'm dead. And he stopped, and then he took off running right down into the middle of the road, into busy Massachusetts Avenue, Embassy Road. Well, I went to college, so I go chasing. I go chasing the guy I think has a bomb into traffic. And now this guy's running with his shirt flapping in the wind, and I'm chasing him, running down the road in my suit. We have a couple counter surveillance units who are in plain clothes, and they have cars that are unmarked, and they're circling around the block for this guy as well. One of them's driving down the road, a female agent. The other guy, he's on the other side. He can't see what's going on. And I got my earpiece in so I can hear their radio traffic. Well, I'm running down the road, dodging cars. This guy's running down the road, dodging cars. And I hear the female agent call on the radio. She's calling this other guy, I think his name was Aaron. Aaron, get over here now. JJ's chasing some guy with a cape. And there's a pause, and I hear, "Why is JJ wearing a cape?" And now I figure I got to shoot at least 2 people today. And now I run over, and the guy actually somehow runs in front of the counter surveillance unit car, gets hit by the car, bounces off, bounces onto the sidewalk, becomes dislodged from his backpack, which now I figure he's definitely going to detonate, because it's called a kill switch. If you get separated from the explosive or you fall down, the explosive automatically goes off. And he still doesn't. We pounce on him, get him in handcuffs, all this. Walk over to the backpack, look at the backpack. I see an officer reach in and open it. I'm like, no! He reaches in, pulls out a video game system. It turns out the guy was a college kid who was drunk, who was high, walking down the street, saw a bunch of cops, got confused, got panicked, and flipped out and just thought he was going to run and cut through some guy's yard. Didn't realize it was the ambassador's house. And then just decided to just run away from me because he was drunk and high, and just absolutely just freaked out. And I was caught a bullet to the head. So the moral of that story is, sometimes there's no right answer. I could have very well have gotten myself killed or somebody else. Sometimes maybe it is better not to shoot. And no, I don't wear a cape. So that's my closing story on that. My contact information, I will leave it up here if we have time to do a little Q&A. I'll leave it up here. Feel free to. I haven't been blogging much, but I do have a blog. I am active on Facebook. I'm definitely active on Twitter. Feel free to email me as well. But I think I mentioned I have like 7 novels out as well. My latest cover is up there. It's part of a series with Trevor Galloway. The first one is Bold Action Remedy, which Martha mentioned earlier. But if you guys have time, I am open to any questions or comments or yelling. So feel free.
Well, JJ, it's Martha. Thank you so much for just an amazing presentation. Everybody, we're seeing some great comments in the chat room that if you have a few moments, I'd like to go over them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, that was just, there's so much terrific detail in it, and everybody in the chat room is just raving about this presentation. So thank you. I'd like to start at the top, if we could just go back and touch on the counterfeit part of this.
Sure.
So the question was, where do counterfeiters get their paper?
So most of the time they'll just use resume paper. If they're trying to make decent counterfeit, they'll use some sort of decent bond paper or resume paper. If they're really not even trying, they're just going to use regular paper, but it's easily detectable. If you're paying any attention whatsoever, you're going to feel it. But if they're really trying to make it decent, they're going to use just regular resume or bond paper, something that feels somewhat comparable. But again, it's really hard to make good counterfeit. Now, another method that is used, and I didn't have time to go into this, counterfeiters will use actual $1 bills, real $1 bills. They'll bleach them and then reprint a 20, a 50, 100 on that $1 bill. And then that way they have the genuine paper, but then they have to somehow figure out how to replicate all the security features. And I could do a whole presentation just on the security features of whatever bill they're trying to replicate, the 10, the 20, the 50, the 100. There's all sorts of other security features that are built into those, such as microprinting, optical varying ink. There's a watermark that is visible in each of those bills. So the higher the denomination, the more security features there are in that bill.
Okay, this is for my clarification. When you talked about the iodine pen, does that react to the counterfeit money or the real money?
Yeah, I have to refresh my memory on this. I believe the chemical compound reacts to the regular paper.
Okay. A follow-up question was, is detecting and exposing money laundering within the Secret Service responsibility?
It can be, yes. Sometimes agencies cross jurisdictions, so it could be FBI jurisdiction, it could be Secret Service jurisdiction. Sometimes there's cross jurisdiction.
Okay, and that's just, I just want to underline that money laundering is different than counterfeiting,
Yes.
right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. How many agents are in an average protective team? Protective intelligence.
An average protective team, like protective detail?
Yes.
It depends on the protectee. So it depends on the protectee, and actually depends on the venue. So you know, I can't give you an exact number. You know, if you are talking about the president's detail, I'm not sure how many right now, because it's probably expanded quite a bit. The threats keep going up. So I couldn't give you an exact number, but you would see less for President Carter than you would President Biden.
Okay. Those are the questions that I've pulled out of the chat room. I see that we still have the participants on board. Does anyone else have any follow-up questions for JJ?
You guys are letting me off easy.
Yeah, they are. All right. Well, thank you again for this amazing presentation. As Teresa noted earlier, we are recording it, and it will be available on our YouTube channel within the next few days, so that if anybody wants to go back and refresh their memory and get some more of this fascinating detail, it'll be there. And I should also mention, just as a reminder, our next meeting is September 11th, and we will have author Tori Eldridge in our next Zoom meeting. So thank you all, everybody. Thank you for this amazing monthly meeting, and we will see you again in September. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you all.